DeltaForce currently has a huge problem with performance, especially at the beginning of rounds, where performance can drop down to 3 or 4 FPS on AMD GPUs. And the situation isn't really any better on Nvidia, where I'm getting these weird periods where performance just completely drops and GPU utilization goes down to maybe 40%. So in today's video, I'd like to talk about potential ways to fix stuttering in DeltaForce and just generally boost performance both on AMD and Nvidia-based systems. Moreover, I'd like to revisit the upscaler section of DeltaForce, as the upscalers are now finally working as intended, and we can now finally look at which of the upscalers actually provides the best visual quality at the highest boost in performance. Beginning with the stuttering issues on Nvidia GPUs, I found that the only way to get rid of this was to actually disable hardware-accelerated GPU scheduling. On top of that, I also disabled game mode, because from my most recent testing, it appears that this also further reduces performance in DeltaForce. Apologies for anybody following my previous DeltaForce graphics guide, because back when I tested this a few months ago, HAGS and game mode actually did not have a detrimental impact on performance in DeltaForce. However, apparently something either has changed in the driver or something changed in the game, whereas these two features actually make the game run really poorly. So in order to disable these two settings, you want to click on the Start menu, type in Game Mode, where you can disable this setting, click on Related Settings Graphics, and under Advanced Graphics Settings, disable the hardware accelerated GPU scheduling. Now, if you do this, you actually have to restart your system for the changes to take effect, and after that, hopefully, you should have a smooth gaming experience on DeltaForce. Quick side note, I personally am actually really sad that we have to disable HAGS in order to get smooth performance in DeltaForce, because on many other games, this setting can provide a nice boost in performance. So I guess you either have to live with these stuttering segments in DeltaForce and leave hardware-accelerated GPU scheduling enabled in order to benefit from its advantages in other games, or you have to turn it off and just get a little bit less performance in your other games. As for AMD, there are two things we can do. Now, the first has been suggested a lot by people on Reddit, and that is actually to roll back your AMD drivers to the one that was released in August. I first didn't really believe that, but to my large surprise, I actually did got much better performance with the August driver when compared to the latest driver that has been released in December. Additionally, this has also been the only driver where I was able to somewhat mitigate these stuttering issue at the beginning of rounds. And here's where the second fix comes into, and that is to disable Smart Access Memory. Now, Smart Access Memory, or SAM for short, is essentially the identical technology as resizable bar on Nvidia, and generally this greatly improves gaming performance on AMD GPUs. However, sadly, on DeltaForce, this also leads to stuttering, especially at the beginning of rounds. So in order to fix all of that, you want to roll back your driver to version 24.8.1, which was released in August, and you want to disable Smart Access Memory in the AMD Adrenal software. Speaking of resizable bar, while the Nvidia driver actually does not natively support ReBAR on DeltaForce, we can force it on using the Nvidia Profile Inspector as shown on screen right now. However, from my testing, this is still reducing performance quite significantly, even though I did read that with the most recent driver update that just released a couple of days ago, this might have been fixed. However, generally, I do not recommend to use the Nvidia Profile Inspector to force ReBAR on unsupported games on Nvidia-based systems, because generally speaking, you're always going to completely tank your performance. Finally, another common suggestion that is floating around the interwebs when it comes to improving performance or reducing the stuttering of DeltaForce is to force the game to use the DirectX 11 API. Now, from testing on all of my systems, this always led to even more stuttery gameplay when compared to DirectX 12. However, it might be that on some very old systems this might actually help you with performance, so you can try to do this. However, I haven't found this to make the game more smooth. Another suggestion is also to use the native launcher for DeltaForce, which you can just download from the official DeltaForce website. And from my testing, this doesn't really improve the stuttering issue. However, it does actually boost average and 1% lows ever so slightly. Note, however, that when you do use the native launcher, you're no longer able to modify config files because the game recognizes that some files have been changed and will revert any changes that you did. So with that, I want to talk about a few very valuable tips to make your life with DeltaForce much better. The first tip that I have is to actually disable the annoying intro movies showing Team Jade and DeltaForce splash screen before the game actually loads. And this is actually super easy to achieve. Simply right-click on DeltaForce in Steam, click on Properties, go to Installed Files, click on Browse, enter the game folder, then DeltaForce, Content, Movies HD, and simply remove these last 3 files. You can remove all of these files, no problem, and next time you start up DeltaForce, you'll no longer get these intro movies. While we're here, we can also completely disable temporal anti-aliasing through a config tweak. I know that there is an option in-game, but that unfortunately doesn't properly work. So open up the Engine.ini file and paste these 2 lines. As you can see, this completely turns off any anti-aliasing in DeltaForce and gives you the highest possible performance out of the box. Personally though, I don't really like how this makes small objects flicker very much on screen. So for instance, hair or vegetation is becoming very unstable, and therefore I usually like to enable one of the 4 different upscalers for a more pleasant and stable presentation. Starting with Temporal Super Resolution, which does get the job done. We no longer have these dancing pixels on screen. However, it does it while making the screen look very blurry. Even at the quality preset, which by the way gives me roughly 44 FPS, the presentation is rather unpleasant. Textures become extremely blurry and details are almost completely lost. You can see what I mean in this freeze frame. Essentially the tree and the radio tower in the background just become one huge blob of colors, and all details of the second radio tower in the background are completely lost. So if you can, I would highly recommend to stay away from Temporal Super Resolution. AMD FSR 2.0 actually provides higher performance than Temporal Super Resolution while being much sharper. Unfortunately, AMD FSR 2.0 struggles a bit with stability of the image, as once again you can see a little bit of flickering, especially when looking at vegetation in movement. This is especially bad at the Ultra Performance preset, where a lot of textures are flickering. When comparing the relatively complex scene with these 2 radio towers in the background and the tree in front, we get a lot more detail over Temporal Super Resolution in the tree, and we don't get this ugly mashing together of colors, especially at the quality preset. So if you don't have an RTX 30 or 40 series GPU and you don't like XESS, then using AMD FSR 2.0 at the quality preset would be my recommendation. However, if you own either a 20, 30 or 40 series Nvidia GPU, that is their RTX lineup, then you also have access to DLSS, which is Deep Learning Supersampling. DLSS definitely produces the best visual quality when it comes to this super complex scene here, where we can see almost the same amount of details in the tree as in the native resolution. The only downside of DLSS is the ghosting behind fast-moving objects of high contrast, but frankly in regular gameplay you will never notice this. So here my recommendation would be to use the quality preset, or if you need more of a performance uplift, then use balanced. And finally, we have Intel XESS, which is actually doing a surprisingly good job in DeltaForce. It doesn't provide as much of a performance uplift as the other upscalers. It also has presets that are actually at a higher native resolution than DLSS and AMD FSR. So if you really need the highest possible performance, then those are the ones you want to use if you're on an Nvidia or an AMD GPU respectively. But for some, XESS might also be a good solution if you're just looking for a smoother image. Personally, I would stay away from the balanced preset and just use the quality preset for XESS, as this provides the highest uplift in performance at the best visual quality. Now, of course, if you're simply interested in the highest possible performance in DeltaForce, then leaving all of the graphic settings on their lowest value is going to achieve just that. However, if you're like me and rather prefer a balance between visual quality and performance, then set both texture filtering and streaming to ultra. This is going to make your textures look much nicer at a shallow angle, and the second option is going to introduce higher quality assets in the game. Also, if you have an Nvidia GPU, make sure to enable reflex low latency to reduce your input latency by ensuring that you're never really GPU bound. On the other hand, if you're CPU bound, do not use enhanced, because from my testing, while I do get ever so slightly lower latency, this also completely destroys performance and will definitely make the game feel less smooth. So even in CPU bound situations, I would recommend to simply turn reflex on. On the other hand, if you don't have an Nvidia GPU, you can also enable an in-game frame rate limiter, which is essentially going to act like the same. It's going to make sure that you're not too GPU bottlenecked. Or if you don't like these predefined values here, you can also use one of the third-party FPS limiters like ReBAR Tuner. Finally, if you're interested in understanding how each of these different graphic settings affect the visual quality of DeltaForce and how much performance you're leaving on the table by increasing certain options such as ambient occlusion, then check out my full performance guide linked on screen right now, where I'm going through each and every one of these settings and showing you side-by-side comparisons and their performance impact. This hasn't changed since the last time I made that video, which is why I'm just going to link it here instead of going through this all once again. But that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you guys in the next video.